Hello guys, and welcome to another episode of my lecture. On today's episode, we'll be talking about threats, under section 29 subsection 5, which was, under the definition of oppression. So we then go into we discuss certain cases in relation to threat as an element, in expunging a confessional statement from being admissible or rejecting it and all that. So let us go straight to my notes. Now, when we are talking about threat, a statement made as a result of the use or the threat of the use of actual violence to the body of the accused will clearly render the statement inadmissible as a confession. Section 29 subsection 2 of the Evidence Act spoke about oppression, which was defined by section 29 subsection 5 of the Evidence Act to include the use or threat of violence, whether or not it amounts to torture. In the case of R versus Baba HASKE, the accused was charged with murder. When the body of the deceased was found, there were circumstances giving cause for suspecting the appellant. The head chief summoned the villagers and said to them, "All of you will be in the cage. I will be galled if you don't tell the truth." Galled means basically that your head will be cut off, just like you'll be hanged. He told the accused that he would inform the police of the circumstances of the suspicion against him and added, "I heard you followed the man with a gun." The court held that the confession later made by the accused was inadmissible as it was given as a result of the threat. The threat here being that the man said, "All of you will be in the cage and will be galled if you don't tell the truth." In the case of R versus EBOHOMIEN and others, some policemen investigating a case of alleged murder took a large number of men, women, children away from the village and detained them. The police later told the elders of the village to come forward to confess so that those innocent among them would be released. Thereafter, the elders made the confession. The court held that the confession is inadmissible. If the mental state of the accused is such that he was deprived of capacity to make a free choice whether to confess or not, and he nevertheless makes a confession, such a confession cannot be said to be voluntary. However, the fact that when the accused made a confession, he was sobbing and frightened and later became hysterical will not make a confession inadmissible, as seen in the case of R versus Isequila. The threat of harm by metaphysical means, however, has been held not to be sufficient for this purpose, as we can see in the case of R versus Udo Aka Eka EBONG. The investigation of the murder of the deceased had proved abortive, and local chief in the area invited 18 villagers in the vicinity for purposes of investigating the death of the deceased. Juju was invited for the purpose, and it was believed by the people that the person who caused the death would go mad and confess. 18 months later, the accused went to the chief and said that he had killed the deceased. The court held that the confession was voluntary from the legal standpoint of view and was properly admitted. So you see, when we are talking about threats and all that, when it comes to, admissibility, I like the fact, the last case, most importantly, Juju is not threat. If someone says that, the person is going to run mad or something like that, or, violence and all that, it is not. It is certainly not. If we compare it to the first case of where the person said that if you don't confess, I'll make sure I arrest you and all of you will be galled. That means your head will be cut off. That is an actual threat. But when you say, where the person doesn't confess, or something like that, that's in Yoruba, it means that that person will run mad. The person who caused it will run mad if the person doesn't come to confess. That cannot amount to a threat of violence or something like that. It isn't. Someone just said it. If you did not do it, you will not be scared. That's the actual fact. So somebody is, making noise outside saying, somebody stole this, the person that stole it will not make it in life. The person that can come and then I was going to confess that I was the one that did. What's my business? Am I the one that stole it? Do you understand? From the legal point of view, it would not amount to grounds to expunge or reject a confessional statement where the threat there was threat of juju or any of those metaphysical means. Also, when the person is hysterical, what does it mean to be hysterical? Where you are like hallucinating, so to say. if it can be proven that you were mentally unstable at that point, which is the job of the defense, not the job of the prosecution. Mentally unstable means that you couldn't have written it well, not that the prosecution had anything to do with it, but you were not mentally in the right position to do it. For example, if there was a murder case and then a person was arrested, and then the person, because he was mentally unstable, let's say mad, and then the person writes a confessional statement, we don't know whether or not he did it. We are talking about the admissibility of that confessional statement in relation to the trial within trial. If it can be established by a medical practitioner that that person is mad, that person didn't write it well, that's another different case. But when the person is hysterical, you know, when you become scared in the night because of something, maybe you just finished watching a particular movie. There's this movie that I watched when I was very young, this Yoruba movie that, you know, was very, very scary. Now imagine watching a very scary Yoruba movie in the night. Yoruba movies nowadays are not even scary. Or watching vampire movie, Vampire Diaries and all that. Maybe for some reason this is your first time you're watching it, or you're watching some zombie movie, or one movie that you couldn't sleep in the night. You know that kind of hysterical feeling you have when you cannot sleep because you think that maybe demon is going to come from nowhere, or this is going to happen, or that is going to happen, and all that. So if you make a confessional statement where you are hysterical, where for example in the night you weren't able to sleep and then something appeared to you while you were in the cell, and then you kept shouting, "Let me out of here, let me out of here, the ghost is coming," or something like that, and you made a confessional statement when you were in that state, that will not still amount to, you know, being expunged. It will not let the court expunge that confessional statement or reject it. Why? Because it doesn't fall under the legal grounds to expunge a confessional statement. Do you understand that? It doesn't fall under the legal ground. As you can see in the last case, that's the case of Udo Eka EBONG. The court held there that it doesn't fall under the legal means. Do you understand? Being hysterical or using juju, the court is still right to admit it. Do you understand? It has to be that there must have been violence. Either, you know, when you watch Nigerian movies, you see where they put on iron and then they want to burn your body with iron, telling them, confess now. Chairman, be calming down. So in that particular case, that definitely will be violence. Or where they threaten you with violence, that if you don't confess now, I will make sure that I do this. Now, that will be violence. Do you understand? Or inhuman or degrading treatment. Using iron or body will be inhuman or degrading. Or torture. Do you understand? Whether or not the violence amounted to torture and all those other things that we look at when we are talking about a confessional statement. So with this, I think I've given you sort of like a real understanding of how confessional statements work in court and all that. So we will still talk about confessional statement, but now let us go to another subheading of the law of evidence, which is admissions. Now people usually, you know, confuse admissions and confession and all that. I will differentiate it later in the lecture, but let's talk about admissions now. In my next lecture, I'll be talking about the introduction to admissions in the law of evidence. I hope you've enjoyed confessional statements, the admissibility, how it works, and all those things. Now let's go to admissions. I will see you in my next class.